And you know what August 31st is now? New Year's Day. And you know what the celebration is? I drive back to the bridge. I park my car in the same spot. I make my way to the midpoint, and I'm looking up, and I'm giving thanks. All because somebody knew and took the time to express.
I'm here with David Woods Bartley, a mental health advocate and speaker who's been featured on multiple TED Talks, was a guest speaker on Fox 40 News, has briefed U.S. Army, NATO, and spoken at a variety of other wellness ministries and organizations across the U.S. David, how are you doing today?
Brett, I am, you know what? I'm super good because I'm here with you. And I'm just, I've been looking forward to this for a long time. So thank you so much for letting me into your life.
Well, we're really glad to have you here. So can you give us a little bit of an overview for those who aren't familiar with you? What type of work do you do? And kind of, we'll get into why you started in that.
Sure. So I am a suicide attempt survivor. On August 31st, 2011, I attempted to take my life, and thankfully I was saved. And I began, as I like to tell people on that day, a journey from mental illness and into a place of mental wellness. And so what I do now is I travel around the country and around the world, sharing my story in an effort to give people a different perspective on this thing called mental illness, and also give them really the true passion is not that that's not important, but I want to give people accessible means to this thing called suicide prevention. Because I think when we talk about suicide prevention, it's just like this huge, daunting, intimidating term. There's like, well, no, I don't have any initials past my name. There's nothing I can do. What if I could show you something that is so simple that you actually already do that could actually save somebody's life? And so really that's what I'm most passionate about. And I get to interact with people. And this can be for audiences. I've done a lot of work with the military and businesses and schools and all over. And I feel incredibly blessed to be able to share my story.
So what got you into this?
So
you mentioned a little bit about it,
Yeah.
we're going to link your full story in the description for those who want to really dig into it. But would you mind telling us a little bit more about the path that led you to this work today?
Absolutely. So I'm 61 years old. And I have, for really 50 years of my life, Brad, I have battled this thing called depression. It's been a knockdown, drag out battle. And accompanied with that was a suicidal ideation. And it culminated on August 31st, 2011, an attempt to take my life. And if I go back to give some of the historical context, the simple answer in terms of like, well, what happened? Did you just wake up one day and be depressed and suicidal? I'm like, well, no, that wasn't it. What happened is I inherited the genetics of my beloved father, James Hamilton Bartley, who unfortunately died when he was just 41 years old. He died of cancer, but I know now from my brothers, 3 older brothers, know that he had debilitating depression. And so that played a part. So I got those genes, and that in and of itself is not necessarily going to be the causal factor, but unfortunately, and to be honest,
kind of gave you a tendency.
Yes, exactly. It's just yeah. And unfortunately, when I was 12, as a new member of a Boy Scout troop, I was raped on multiple occasions by a Boy Scout leader. And this was in the 70s. And I'll never forget that this monster, every time he did it, he said, David, these are initiations and all the boys go through it, but we don't talk about it. And so that planted the seeds. And so when I talk about a 50-year fight, I'm pretty confident in I know the dates. And so life is going along, and I grew up, and I grew up on the East Coast and moved out here to Northern California, where I live now, in the late 80s. And there's a great quote by Maya Angelou. And Maya Angelou says, "There's no greater agony than carrying the weight of an untold story." And so all those years, Brett, I've not told the story. And There's another quote that says, to not have your suffering recognized is an almost unspeakable form of violence. So, and I think my story, unfortunately, is very, unfortunately, it's common. And that's part of what I want to do in the work that I do now, is to get people to create the space for them to tell their story. And so ultimately, on August 31st, 2011, it wasn't that I wanted to die. What I wanted was this indescribably horrific pain that was of body, mind, and spirit to end. And not believing that there could ever be an end to it. There was only one other option left. And that was an option that at that point, at 48 years old, Brett, I'd probably thought about 10,000 times. Now that day was to act upon it. And so I was living and still am, in Northern California, outside of Sacramento. Interestingly, I had a fire engine red Dodge Dakota pickup truck. And I stress that to say, even my vehicle was emblematic of the crisis that was like burning inside of me. And I made short 20-minute drive from where I was living with my then wife, Deanna, and I went to what's known as the Forest Hill Bridge. So we're just a couple hours from San Francisco and the world famous, iconic Golden Gate Bridge. Well, this is the Forest Hill Bridge, and it's 730 feet tall. It's 500 feet further off the ground than its more famous cousin. And so I made my way there, parked my vehicle, ultimately walked to the center point of the bridge, pressed my body up against the barrier, bent over, looked not out but down to the North Fork of the American River, and then picked out a spot and was literally, just didn't need much more of a body shift, was literally about to fall to my death. And a first responder, somebody had called 911, and a first responder came, and he made what is, for me, essential in all of this, is he made connection. Not contact, he made connection. And my belief, brother, is that connection creates hope. And hope is the thing that will and does save lives.
And could you help us understand a little bit about the difference in your mind between connection and contact?
Contact is logistical. It's like, when you bump into somebody. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. It's when you push the button for an elevator. It's backing your car into a parking space. It's the physical action that has not necessarily a whole lot of mental involvement, but there's nothing spiritual about it. There's nothing sacred about it. There's no essence to contact, but connection it is all of those things. And I knew this to be true, but you got to have, for me, when I talk, I want to make sure that I have some credibility in bringing in things to be very, very specific. So, like, I like to define things. And so for connection, found this incredible definition by Brene Brown. So anything that's going to come from Brene Brown is going to be amazing. And of course, this is so perfect. And here's what this great, extraordinary soul says. I define connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and they derive strength and sustenance from the relationship. I'm like, yes, that's that. And so I would ask them, in that space, how could you feel anything but hopeful? It'd be impossible. When you're seen, heard, and valued, when you can give and receive freely, when you are lifted up as a result of your time in a relationship, how can you feel anything but hopeful? It's impossible. The only way that you could not feel hopeful is to disconnect. But in the space of connection, and hope is literally defined, and this is why for me, I believe it saves lives, certainly did mine. Hope, literally out of the Cambridge Dictionary, is defined as the feeling, which I think is so essential, the feeling that what is wanted can be had. You're like,
That's awesome. I've been working kind of on a personal definition of hope, and I had not actually looked up the dictionary definition of it, but I'm surprised at the overlap of it, because mine has a lot more to do with kind of a metaphysical type of way of looking at it. But it very much is what you're saying. I understand hope as an empowered perspective, that
oh, I love that.
regardless of the situation I'm in, I will pursue the best possible outcome.
I love it.
And that having that bubble, having that I almost phrase it as a commitment to pursue that. And I think it's getting that to that from the inside out of like, I will pursue the best possible outcome. And that idea of it's an empowered perspective. It's like I look, it's not that everything's great. I think a lot of people tend to look at hope as like, oh yeah, hope is nice. Hope is this feeling that, everything's going to be okay. It's like, no, sometimes it ain't okay.
Yeah, right.
But is there a way forward?
Right.
And in my experience, there almost always is a way forward. And that's what you look for. And so I love how you're talking about that, the dictionary definition and your experience of that. Could you kind of draw the line for us of how did connection with someone else instill, or maybe spark, or maybe share that essence of hope in you? How did the connection lead to hope?
So on the bridge, and this is well, let me just explain it. So after some initial talk back and forth, which I have no memory of at all, here's the first thing I remember is the first responder asked me. Again, I'm hanging over a 730-foot tall bridge. There's no way I'm going to survive this drop. First question, David, would you please share? Love how you use that word. Not tell, share. David, would you please share with me, what does it feel like when you're depressed? That was his first question. And most of us, I get emotional because I just think like most of us, and I get it, I'm not judging anybody, but most of us think, okay, well, we don't want to talk about this thing that's causing them to feel this way. But actually what I share with people, a conversation, maybe not every single time, I don't want to make, but the majority of the time, a conversation to allow somebody to truly express how they feel can be one of the most beneficial things that you could ever do for another human being. And you know what he did? He listened. There's an incredible quote. I'm a freak about quotes, so please forgive me. Quote that says, our listening creates a sanctuary for the homeless parts in another person. And so then he says, well, what's it like on your worst day? And we had this conversation. And what happened is, to go back more directly to your question, it actually, because your definition of hope is beautiful, it actually presents that. So then ultimately, when he asked me the question, will you please come with me? And I said, yes. And so I'm taken off the bridge to an emergency room, and now I'm going to go spend 15 days in a psych ward. And let me just say a couple things here about the psychiatric facility. My time there was amazing. It was incredible. There was never a bad day. And I think about the people that worked, the nurses and the staff and everybody who worked in that place, just, committed to me and my roommate Daniel in the worst place in our lives. And yet they didn't treat us like we were crazy. They treated us like we were hurt and in need of healing and in need of, we needed hope. And I'll tell you, how many days my family came to visit me in the psych ward? 15. And this was back, whatever, 13 years ago. I can't do the math. Whatever year that was, 2011. There was an old-fashioned payphone in the hallway, and if you wanted to get in touch with one of the patients, you would call into that payphone. And if you were walking by as a patient and you pick up the phone and the phone wasn't for you, you would just say, "Hey, Johnny, the phone's for you." Brett, I got so many calls. By the third day, and this is not a lie, the other patients refused to answer the phone. Like, I heard from people that I hadn't heard from in years. And when they found out where I was and why, it was, "I love you." It was amazing. It's just, yeah. It's not what you hear about, but it happens.
I think there's a lot of people who they're scared to talk about it. They're scared to bring it up because most people are kind of ignorant about it unless they've been through it themselves. And I think they're afraid to trigger something in the other person and send them down into a pit. But what you're saying is, no, that person is living in a pit. What you're doing is opening a window into it.
Exactly. Beautifully said. Your metaphor is perfect. It is, and it's very counterintuitive. It's like, well, no, don't talk about this one thing. But what I'm saying is, and I guess again, I go back to Maya Angelou: there is no greater agony than bearing the weight of an untold story. And that's this weight just becomes, you can no longer do it. And I got to stress that you talk to attempt survivors, almost universally, they'll say it wasn't that they wanted to die. It's they wanted the pain to end. And this is a very big difference. It's like as much a difference between contact and connection, between wanting to die and wanting this to close to indescribable pain to end. Because part of it is because, Brett, it is so all encompassing.
And sometimes just taking the time to authentically share the burden might somewhat lift it off of the shoulders just a little bit.
Absolutely.
The other person.
Absolutely. And when you're in the space, and we know what it's like when we share something important and the person's really listening, we know what that's like. That is seen, heard, valued. That is, to your beautiful definition, that is, you are awash in the experience of hope. In my mind, there's not many things more healing than that opportunity. And so I have spent many years in therapy, and I have a phenomenal therapist. And that experience I have never come out of therapy in which I haven't benefited in some way, shape, or form. And it's because I'm with this soul, this extraordinary person. It's been a man, it's been a woman, I've been in group. There's never been a time. It's not always comfortable, but it's always beneficial because it is something that is important. We're not talking about the weather.
So I'd like to focus on that authentic caring for just a second and go back to your experience in the psych ward. When all of those people called you out of the blue and you hadn't heard from them in years, did that Did that feel authentic to you, or did that feel like they're just calling you because you're down, like they didn't care when you were going through it, but now they cared here? Or did it feel like something else?
No, it felt what it felt like for me was, as soon as they became aware of my suffering, they responded. So it didn't matter, and it was all, the duration in terms of time between last conversation and then was all over the map. There were different times. I was so taken by the fact that they called, and the same thing with my family. And my family, I have an amazing family. I'm just incredibly blessed. And I still think about, because no one else in the psych ward had the consistency of visitors that I did. And just because on the one hand you think, oh my gosh, David's in the psych ward, you don't, hey, what are you doing today? Oh, I'm going to see David. He's in the psych ward. Really? My family they didn't give it. They could care less. They didn't care. It's just, and I'll tell you, again, I still fight this thing. And this is probably a good time to throw this in. So I'm very compliant when it comes to wellness. So if Dr. Brett says, David, here's your meds and you do this, I am routine. I'm a stick to it. I'm not the guy that when he feels better stops taking his meds. Like, that doesn't happen. So end of last year, I fell into a depression that was the worst of my entire life, and made no sense, because I'm working, I'm out presenting and teaching, and I'm seeing my therapists and going to group and everything else, and yet down I went. And so we being my beloved, my fiance, Summer, are like, what do we do? And I have an incredible friend who happens to be a psychiatrist, and he recommended, and I didn't want to do it at first because it has tremendous stigma and fear associated with it, but thankfully we did ECT, which is electroconvulsive therapy, so shock therapy. So most people know it by One Flew Over a Cuckoo's Nest. And what it is you go in and they put electrodes. Dr. Marasa puts electrodes around my head. And then the anesthesiologist puts me under completely in general anesthesia. And then they run electricity that will cause a seizure in my brain, 30 to 45 seconds. And then I go into recovery and wake up in recovery. And 31 sessions later, number 32 will be on Friday, changed my life. Unbelievable. It has just been, what I like to say is, ECT kicked depression's ass. It just, because I was in the worst space I had ever been in. Every day I would ask Summer to please let me die. And at the beginning, we did ECT 3 days a week. And then we went to 2 days a week. And then now we're like once a month. And we'll do that for probably till the end of the year, and then we'll kind of figure out. But the change that it has created in my mind, body, and spirit, it's amazing. And through this whole thing, there has been my family. And I would tell you, so I have 3 brothers, 6, 9, 11 years older than I. And the one lives in Colorado, the one lives here, and the other lives in Illinois. And so again, our father died. I was just 7. And at that time, my eldest brother kind of stepped into more of a fatherly role. And he served 42 years in the Army, enlisted and became a 2-star general. He's always been my guy. Since when I slipped into this most recent horrific place, Brett, he stepped up and partnered with my fiance. Those 2 saved my life. And every day, my day starts with a text from my brother, the general, my dad. And it's about what he's going to do that day, guidance for me, and then a motivational thought. And then the end of the day, you know, the last thing I do before I go to bed, I talk to him on the phone. And it's amazing to me, you know, that and my fiance is just, it's been a hard road. But she now gets to benefit from 30 plus sessions of ECT and has seen how her beloved has transformed in these 6 months. And I talk about it now in my talks because I want people, if they find themselves in a place where their meds are not working or something, they don't know what else to do, give this a try. Because most people don't, they're totally afraid of it because they think, oh my God, you know.
Give ECT a try?
Yes, exactly. Give it a try. If you're in that place and nothing else is working, try this, please. I've done it 31 times and I'm more than fine.
So I have one friend who also did ECT, but for her it was much more of it was one experience that had a massive impact on the one go. For you, it sounds like it's been repeated experiences that have had a gradual increase over time. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and in fact, it was interesting. Thank you for bringing that up because typically people don't have as many sessions as I do, but that's how bad it was for me. So, yeah, and in fact,
and would you describe it as like kind of a manual reboot for certain areas of the brain, or how would you describe what's happening in you and your experience of it before and after?
here's an example. So, probably like 2-3 weeks ago, I was having a really bad day. Just was, and we use all kinds of adjectives to describe those kinds of days. Now, in the past, that would have me go right down depression alley, and I would be, and depending on the kind of the DEFCON level of depression, would be at what point does suicide thinking come in, and then you're just kind of used to it after all these years. So here it is, like 2 weeks ago, bad day. Just things are not working. And I'm like, and Brad, I'm in the middle of the day, I pause and I think, I'm not depressed. Now I'm not happy, but I'm not depressed. Things are still, you know, I'm like, what is
You
this?
noticed that your low wasn't as low as before, or was it
Well,
just a different kind of low?
you know what it was? What I realized, because I wanted to identify what the feeling was. It was disappointment. There's like, that's what ECT did. ECT on a horrific day replaced depression with disappointment. That's like, again, the difference between contact and connection. It's just like, I can manage disappointment. This disappointment is just like, okay, disappointment's finite. I'm like, and the other part is I don't think about killing myself. Now that well, I mean, I have spent 50 years thinking about killing myself, and I don't do that anymore. That's
It's incredible.
it's, and then, you know, and even though I'm feeling better, the texts from my brother don't stop. Our phone calls don't stop. You know, it's like wow. You know, and I tell him all the time. I tell my sweetheart, I say, I can't thank you enough. And he's like, okay, all good. Yeah, I'm like, ooh, man. Yeah, so And there are, I have other people who fall in kind of that same category. I mean, my doctor, Marasa, who does the treatments, Jeremy and Betty, my two nurses that I know best. I'm going to see them on Friday. I'm going for session number 32 on Friday. You know, it's more of a maintenance thing. Yeah, it's
I'd love to talk about that both in the initial and in the kind of transition to what you call the maintenance. And that one of the things that struck me in listening to your TED Talks, there was at one point, I forget which one it was, but you described how your self-care plan has really been, you talk about how necessary it was that it would be so holistic in your relationship with your higher power, your connection to other people, your physical health, your mental health, and how all of these things you've developed this out. And it struck me because actually one of the things that our company is developing is a framework for a holistic model that brings people together, the healers and the healing, and we call it the 7-part person, but it talks about all those different elements and how important they are to address all of them in order to address any chronic issues in someone's life, in order to have a sustainable high level of impact in that person's life. And I would love, it sounds like you have maybe not the 7-part person, but maybe it sounds like you have a similar kind of understanding of the necessity of all these different parts of your life needing to be addressed. And I would love for you to kind of explain your perspective on that and how you discovered it and kind of how you employ that in your life, how that led to where you are and how you kind of sustain that. Would you talk a little bit about those things?
No, absolutely. Thank you so much. And, you know, for me, it was just incredibly blessed because after my father passed away, my mom, Suzanne, went into, and she was like about 40, went to nursing school. And she became a nurse because she wanted to. And in that simultaneously, she did, and this was back in the 70s, she did all this research and was so far ahead of on in psychiatry. They talk a lot about brain gut relationship and how important nutrition is. And so my mom was all about gut health, digestive health, years and years and years and years and years ago. So we grew up taking supplements. She said, all right, you're going to start taking this. So it was just a natural thing. And my best friend, Michael, who lived right across the street, his mother, Lois, was the same way. While not a nurse, but she had that same nutritional focus. So I was just brought up in this paradigm in which nutrition was a key component. And I don't eat perfectly, but like I have this incredible green mega shake with all kinds of stuff in it. It's so that I was blessed to be taught early on. And then from my brothers, all three of them, Tom and Jim, in addition to John, who's the oldest, they were great influences in terms of, from a exercise standpoint, just the consistency of how they took care of their bodies. You know, my brother in the Army, it's called PT, physical training. And my middle two brothers, it was, you know, we're going to the gym. And so I just got, and then my best friend, David and Michael, we just worked out on a regular basis. So I think I had a head start in that just growing up. And I just kind of assumed, doesn't everybody understand the need for okay, so that was exercise and then nutrition, and then moved out and then got into positive psychology. Just, you know, look at Tony Robbins and Dale Carnegie and things like that. And so when I talk to people, when I'm out giving talks, I share that I have had to learn to put my self-care on a pedestal. Like you can't give from an empty well. There's no way that I can be of any service to anybody unless I take care of this. And so it is body, mind, and spirit. And when I say spirit, I mean the essence of who somebody is. So it's about sleep. It's about nutrition, about physical exercise. It's about, for me, it's about I have meds. I take 4 meds that I take that work beautifully. It's about, for my mind, I see a therapist. I go to ECT. What I would say is, I think if I could do nothing else, go into group which is my support group, which are all people who are dancing with similar issues. Man, it goes all the way back to what you and I were talking at the beginning. It's about the sharing of stories, the similar, when you talk about, when you have somebody who's walked a similar path and you hear their story, you're just like, oh my gosh. So that's mine. And then spirit, then I have my own spiritual practice. But my work, well, it's being the best partner I can be to my beloved. My former wife and I did not have children. My beloved does. So now I'm a bonus dad to 3 amazing souls. So I'm learning what it's like to be a dad, which is pretty great. And then the work that I do to go out and to try to make a positive difference. So all of those things are the tenets. They're really the tenets of my wellness, but really the tenets of my life. And the only thing, well, the thing that I'm missing, and my beloved is harping on me, and rightfully so, is I really don't have a hobby. And so and so we got to be careful, because that could have me be out of balance. So yeah, this whole person care, I think, I don't know how you could be well without it. I mean, yeah. And so I've been blessed to have been led and mentored and have these examples that were right in my inner circle, that everybody's doing that. Like, okay. So I'm more surprised when people don't do it.
I love that. And you said about you can't pour from an empty bucket, I think is what you said.
Or can't give from an empty well.
Can't give from an empty well. And that it really is something that, especially, I think it's getting better, but there's a huge culture, whether it's in religious culture or work culture, or there's this predominant mentality that a lot of people have, that self-care is selfish, that
Right.
I'm taking away from the people who need me to do something as frivolous as self-care. And what you're saying is, no, you cannot be at your best if you don't take care of yourself. I kind of like to think of it as cascading buckets, where you have to fill the right bucket first. And if you fill the right bucket first, there will be enough for everyone.
Exactly.
But if you fill the wrong bucket first, there's no way to make water travel up.
Oh, wow. Well said.
And so the idea of taking care of myself, then taking care of my most intimate relationships, then taking care of my broader relationships, then taking care of my community, mission, purpose, all of that stuff. It's great. And like, there's room for all of that. But one of the reasons people burn out is that they mix up the order.
Right.
And they forget what comes first in order for that to pour out. Could you talk a little bit about the like selfishness versus self-care, and like how you walk that out?
Again, without sounding being redundant and like a broken record, I'm blessed because my beloved and my kids, if I use it, that's my most intimate circle. They're incredibly supportive. Like, so again, I'm going to ECT on Friday. They'll all like, well, my sweetheart will drive me there. Will wait for me to have treatment, come into recovery, drive me home. When I get home, the kids will say, "How was your treatment?" Everything else. So all of that, it's just this constant reminder. There's never like, oh, can't you postpone it or do something else different on that day, or I haven't had enough sessions, or whatever. I don't get any of that, and so it is the environment that I am blessed to live in, the home that I'm blessed to live in, that is completely supportive of me prioritizing, in this case, my mental health. And they're used to me getting up early, and so I walk the dogs, Percy and Lexi, and then I go to the gym and work out. They know the regularity of all that. It's just like this, and then I lay out everybody else's medication and vitamins. So I lay all their stuff out in the morning. So they have it. It's all good. So it's just this. It's this. And I love that the word just came to me. It's a beautiful collaboration. It really is. It's yeah. So my son just he takes his You know, my beloved takes her vitamins. It's it's just everything is, oh, what's the word I want? I don't know. Like it's
My
all
wife,
good.
my wife talks about, likes to use the word to curate your life so that it leads towards wellness. And she's had her own like lifelong struggle with mental illness and with chronic
Mm,
health issues and stuff. And she talks about the need to curate your life, where you intentionally bring in certain people, certain elements, certain practices, certain things, and you intentionally remove certain elements, certain things, certain people, so that everything in your life is facilitating, pushing you towards, or at least not limiting you from that healing journey that you're on. And it sounds like you have been blessed to have something like that in your own life and in your background and in your community.
exactly. And what I would say is, but that what you described about your beloved sounds very synonymous with your definition of hope. Like
Yeah.
those two things are like, it's like like listening
And
to.
and it's it's the power, but it's also the thing that keeps many people from healing, is because it's different than having a broken arm. It's different than having something that you can go to a doctor, an acute issue, you can go to a doctor, they can do something, fix it, and you can walk away in a couple months. Chronic issues need to have a life shift,
Yeah.
because there's so many things involved in why you're there, and there are so many things involved in getting you out of there. And it's the encouraging part is, if you're willing to make that shift, anyone can do it.
Mm,
The difficult part is it's a very hard shift.
yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's interesting what there has been more has come with ECT than I guess I would say than I hoped for. There's been this, and part of it's been kind of attitudinal, um, perspective, behaviorally. There's just been some other stuff that's like I have greater access to my emotions than I did before. I mean, I was always, I always had access, but since ECT is like, man, I'm like, and I think it's just stuff has been, my brain is being rebooted,
Rewired.
rewired, yeah, rewired. And I think, I was talking to somebody the other day and they brought up this great point. I never thought about it, that the fact that I was raped when I was 12 and my brain was still developing at that young age. So the architecture of it got messed up, which impacted me for many decades. I think, I don't know if this is the right word, but conversely, ECT now it's like rebuilding it. I mean, I've had 31 seizures, and there's been a rebuilding of this, and yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing to me. It really is. So,
Yeah, that really
and
is a key point about mental health, and specifically about chronic mental health issues, is that the wiring in the brain. I kind of think of it like a network of a network of connections, or a network of conclusions that you have made over the course of your life based on the situation that you're in. And every conclusion, every connection point builds off the last, and your brain is building this map of reality. And if you had a conclusion 30 years ago, that's not just sitting there on the surface of the network. That's 30 years deep into your network.
oh wow.
And that
So,
takes some rewiring, that takes some peeling away, that takes some, but there are different ways of doing that. Some through therapy, some through meditative prayer, some through, like you say, ECT, which I was not aware of, like this kind of element of it, but it's beautiful that it's out there. But it's part of the reason that some of the things take time to undo, and people are kind of like, well, I took care of that. Why am I still dealing with this? But one of the things that people experience is that it takes a while to kind of peel away the layers before you get to the core memory, the core conclusion. And then once that core conclusion is rewired, it takes a little while for that to work its way out to the rest of the network, for the information in that network, in that point, to work its way out. So like it's go ahead.
Yeah, it's just it's so cool. It is literally like, there's like a construction crew in there doing their thing. It's, yeah.
And I love that we have so many different types of options out there that are doing this similar thing. I am more familiar with the spiritual or the like kind of more psychologically bent ways of addressing these things, but it sounds like these a little bit more kind of physical wiring oriented, with the ECT therapy, or maybe I'm just being redundant there, but the ECT, and how I love the fact that there are so many different options out there for someone who's wanting to pursue this, because some people are open to certain things more than others, or some people are just aware of one more than the other, and the idea that there are so many different options to begin exploring this area. There's so many different access points for people. I think it's amazing. I think that it's evidence that we are heading towards something that is spreading across the world, and wellness is becoming something that is more and more accessible to the masses. It's not just whether you have a very niche access or a lot of money to pursue this, or a very specific knowledge that took you 40 years to acquire. Like, no, this is actually being spread out for everyone to be able to access and change their life for the better. And I love that you have experienced that, and that the ECT has been so amazing in your life. I would love to kind of shift a little bit to that kind of global perspective, because of the work that you're doing as a result of this. Could you tell us a little bit more about kind of the work that you do on a daily, and like how you are taking your struggle into your purpose, and how you are using that to change the world?
So thank you for the question. So the base talk that I give most often is called the why of suicide and the how of hope. Because I don't want to, I think it's important for me, I need to talk about the problem to set up what is my response. I don't like to use the word solution. I want to say this is my suggested response to it. And so give an idea of people, like, okay, what happened? How did I get to that place? What is it like to live with this?
Situation and response type of thing.
Right, exactly. And then shift by pivot in the middle of the talk on the self-care, whole person care, and then say that of everything that I do, connection is the single most important thing, because connection creates hope, and hope saves lives. And what I do is just say is, what I'm going to teach you are 3 ways that you can create connection with anybody, anytime, any place, anywhere. And because now we're firmly grounded in what the definition of connection is, seen, heard, valued at its core, that it's going to produce this experience of hope. And my belief is when somebody like me, suicidal, when we have the experience of hope, at least in that moment, we're not going to take our lives. And so what I talk about is recognition, understanding, and expression. And I tell people, I'm going to teach you to remember people's names. Like, start with that. Because we all know what it's like when someone remembers our name and we have no expectation. How does that feel? And then I want you to use curiosity to create understanding, because what we see is almost never what is. There's always a story. But please don't use the question why, because why sets up a defensive answer. Don't ask, why did you do that? Ask, what inspired you to do that? And then third, expression. Let people know how you feel. It could be by way of a text, but it can be some other ways. And then I go into these stories, and I balance that with a quotation to say, look, I'm not asking you just to take my word for this. I want you to consider this. And so this is an amazing man. It is Dr. Drew Ramsey. He's an esteemed psychiatrist, noted author, professor at Columbia, farmer, very much into brain gut health, it specializes in suicide. And Brett, This is what Dr. Ramsey says. This is what he says to all of us. Someone you see today is thinking about killing themselves. Your smile, your question, your love could save them. Trust me, they told me it did. And so then I say, okay, so your smile. What if I could teach you a way to remember somebody's name? What would that be like? And then I tell a story that what oftentimes what we see is not what it is. So a little bit of a backstory is that my former beloved, who's still one of my greatest friends, Deanna and I ran a very large animal sanctuary for many years. And the sanctuary was home to animals that were dying or special needs. And so we did no adoptions. And we had as many as 100 animals at any one time. So one day we get a call, and it's from an animal shelter. And what happened was an old man, about 90 years old, walks in, and he has this old basset hound cross. And he goes up to the shelter worker and he says, I was out on my walk and I found this dog, and he was just wandering around. He has no identification. I didn't know what else to do. I thought I should just bring him in here, and maybe you could do something. And the shelter worker was like, oh my God, sir, thank you so much. Whoa, thank you. Would you please just let us know your name and telephone number in case we need to get in touch with you, and where you found the dog? I'm going to take him in the back, and he's probably in his late teens. I'm going to check for a microchip. Probably doesn't have one because he really didn't do it back then, but who knows? Old man does what he's asked to do, fills out the information. Shelter worker goes in the back, scans the dog, microchip. Can't believe it. Comes back in to the man and says, sir, you're going to be so happy. Oh my God, we can find out who the owner is. And then takes a piece of paper from the man and compares the information, and it matches. This is his dog. So from the outside looking in, like if I was there, I'm a guy that took care of dying old animals. I'd have lost my mind. Like, there ain't no way. What? How could you be so cruel? But you know what? You know, right, what that extraordinary woman working at the shelter did? You know what she did? She looked at this man and she asked one question. She said, sir, what happened? And at that moment, the man burst into tears, just like me. And when he could finally compose himself, he said, this is Joshua. Joshua was 16 years old. I've had Joshua since he was 8 weeks old. There's nothing more important to me than my dog, but I'm dying. And tomorrow I have to go into a medical facility, and I begged and I pleaded and I offered to pay. I would do anything if they would please let me take Joshua. And they said no. And he said, I was afraid if I told you the truth that you would put Joshua to sleep. But I know that he has time left. And you know what the woman did? She said, sir, there's a sanctuary down the hill, and they take in old dogs. How about we call them, and maybe they have room for one more? And we did. And the only reason that Joshua got to live the next 18 months of his life is because one person asked one question. So I'm saying, when we go out and see things, ask a question and then listen. That's all. And then when I talk about expression, my big brother, as a 2-star general, is a master of the handwritten note. And he always sent it to their home address. And my brother's very humble. And so until 3 years ago, August 31st of every year was the worst day of the year for me, because it's the anniversary of the day I was going to kill myself. And I'm a January baby. I don't like summer anyway. I particularly hate this day. So I'm angry, and I'm upset, and I'm hurt, and I'm all these different emotions, Brett. So I go to the mailbox, and there's an envelope, and it's addressed to me. There's no return address, and I rip open. It's this card. And it says, advice from a glacier. Who cares? Here's what a glacier, just in case you want to know. Advice from a glacier: carve your own path, go slow, channel your strengths, smooth the way for others, but whatever. Like, I don't care. I'm going to throw the card away. Not today. But something greater than me said, no, open the card. And the card says, happy today. And it's from my friend Greg, who knew that day. Like, he knew the card needed to show up on that day. Hey, just a note to remind you that you are an extraordinary person with so much to give so many others. You are a tremendous source of healing just by your personable presence. This is not only my sentiment. So many others also believe in you. Believe in yourself. Reject the lies. I love you. And you know what August 31st is now? New Year's Day. And you know what the celebration is? I drive back to the bridge. I park my car in the same spot. And I make my way to the midpoint. But I'm looking up and I'm giving thanks. All because somebody knew and took the time to express. That's all I'm asking. Remember, someone that you see today is thinking about killing themselves. Your smile, your question, your love could save them. Trust me, they told me it did.
Thank you for sharing that part of your life and giving us an insight into that.
Well, is there time for one more story?
Yeah.
This is another example of expression. So I think we shared, it might have been before we recorded, to do a lot with military, which is particularly meaningful because my beloved brother did 42 years. And so 2 years ago, I was in North Carolina working with an Army unit, and it was a battalion. And the battalion commander was Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Trouse. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful man. And so in the military, when you give a talk, they call it a briefing. So I had done the briefing, and the colonel said, David, would you please come to my office? I said, absolutely, sir. So I go to his office, and he said, David, your talk was really meaningful. He said, but the part about the Boy Scouts and what happened to you, I can't get past that. I said, David, I can't get past that because I was an Eagle Scout. My time in the Boy Scouts was transformational. It was foundational into who I am as a man, as a husband, as a colonel in the Army, as a battalion commander. It's just like our experiences couldn't have been more different. So then Brady, the colonel, took his hand and he pulled out his wallet. And he's facing away from me. And he pulls out, it's like a credit card. He says, David, when you become an Eagle Scout, you get one of these. And he turns it to me, and it's the size of a credit card, and it's an Eagle Scout card. He said, I got this on November 3rd, 1998. He says, I carry it with me all the time. It's really important to me. And then he gave me the card, and I took it. I'm like, wow, sir, it's pretty extraordinary. And I go to give the card back. And he says, "No, you keep it. You've earned it." And so now I carry Colonel's Eagle Scout card with me. And I have had many Eagle Scouts come up to me and show me their cards and say the fact that the Colonel gave me his was an extraordinary expression. And I share it because it is one of those things that every time I tell that story, there's an aspect of healing that occurs within me because of what one man did when he found out my suffering. The only thing that came to him was to give me part of him.
And gave you a new memory.
Mm.
Associated.
Yes, thank you. That's beautiful. Thank you. That's exactly right.
A new conclusion for your network.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a great guy. The Colonel's pretty awesome.
Amazing story.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm happy that he did that.
Yeah.
And that's also that it's been reinforced over the years by the others who have shown you, like, that was reminded you how big it was.
Yeah.
So definitely go all day on this. I'm enjoying it. I'm enraptured in the conversation and the stories, and you're a phenomenal storyteller. I would love to get a little bit more on, like, I'd love to kind of shift to getting some advice and some resources from you. Obviously, the process of healing is a lot longer, but let's say someone is watching this and they're struggling right now. Perhaps they're struggling with depression, perhaps they're struggling with anxiety, perhaps it's something else, but they're struggling. And what would be like a 1, 2, 3 for that person to experience some peace today?
So I think someone taught me this acronym, Brett, and I think it is I don't know, I can't remember who it was, or I'd give them credit for it. It's the acronym is HALT. Like, just be aware if you're to hurt, angry, lonely. No, I'm sorry, not hurt, excuse me. Hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. So typically, if we were in a place of despair, maybe even depression, there's going to be a corresponding one of these that is attached to that. So maybe the most direct path to get even a modicum of relief would be to attend to, if we're hungry, let's get something to eat. If we're angry, do we need to just go somewhere and scream? If we're lonely, do we need to text somebody or call someone and say, "Hey, you know what? I got to talk to you right now." And if we're tired, do we need to lay down? That may give us the most immediate experience of relief just in that moment, because again, those 4 things are going to be tied into the more severe emotion.
And that kind of goes a little bit back to the empowered perspective, or the idea of, if this is, like, identify the issue, and then if you can name it, you can do something about it.
Exactly. I love that. Yes. Because then it's no longer an unknown. Yeah.
And even if there's stuff going on under the surface where there's perhaps more chronic issues that need addressed, a lot of times those are the things that kind of are dipping you down further into that well of ick that you're dealing with on the inside. And so even just taking care of those things for the temporary fixes, or the just dealing with the more kind of surface level issues that might be the hungry, angry, lonely, tired. A lot of times those will kind of give you the mental space and clarity to then kind of reset and say, okay, how do I actually dig into what's underneath all this?
Oh, brilliant. Yes, that's beautiful. Exactly. That's even a better explanation.
So what would you say for someone who perhaps they've done the halt, they've done the hungry, angry, lonely, tired, but they've noticed that this is something that's repeating, and so they need to do something more than just that. How would they start on their own journey like you did?
I think first thing, find a therapist. I can't. I mean, I have spent hundreds of hours in therapy in all different types of therapy. There's all different types of therapy, and I've done a lot of different types of therapy. Still, my appointment is a week from Monday. See Dr. Binus. I think I just if we're in that space that you described so powerfully, Brett, I don't think we can get out of it by ourselves. And I think a professional therapist could be a psychiatrist, could be a psychologist, could be a social worker, could be, it doesn't have to just be a psychiatrist. But I think that's the number one thing. Second would be equally important is to find a support group. And a support group is, and I've participated in many, I have facilitated many, because it's all peer support. So these are people who are walking a similar path, and we've all had the experience when we share what ails us, if that's a word, and somebody really gets it, and that's healing. And so I spent a lot of time in a group. Group is really powerful. So I think that's the second. And third would be either look to make a change from a nutritional standpoint and or potentially introduce a medication. If you don't want to do the med thing, go the nutritional route. I think go the nutritional route regardless. And yeah, and I think for me, it's that order. It's first, okay, let me go. And don't call it a therapist, call it a coach. I get it. It's as much coaching from Dr. Binus as it is as therapy. And then group is just this, you look at, I think it goes back to your beautiful definition of hope. When you attend group on a regular basis and you see somebody who's been struggling and they start to make some inroads and moving in a different direction, man, that's just like, that's a beautiful thing to witness. And then on the nutritional side, nutrition can make an enormous difference. And there's where, to your point, and I agree with you 1,000%, we are headed, I think because of it, we're headed towards this incredible epiphany and corresponding, I can't think of a good word, just word, because so many people have access and are now literally ingesting different things into their body, and their body is positively responding. We're giving it good fuel, and that impacts everything. So you may not need to get on meds, may not need, but yeah. So therapy, group, nutrition.
And I think medication can sometimes be a little bit divisive because people are either all for it or all against it, and there tends to be in some cases where people in the medical field they push for certain things, and people in other areas of the wellness field push against it. My kind of thought on medication is like medication gives you a reprieve for what's going on underneath. And it gives you it's kind of like the halt that you talked about, where
right.
it gives you a mental break, it gives you a leg up. And then like you said, doing that along with nutrition, along with mental health practices, along with those things where you begin to kind of scoop out that well that's underneath, that's being managed. Like, I think like used along with these other things, it can be an amazing asset. I think the issue comes when you don't do those other things, and you only keep taking the medication without addressing these other more core issues. I think that
I concur, because I think, I don't know, and I don't know, can meds have the same reconstructive type effect that ECT does? I don't know. So yeah.
I'm
I
sure
love,
I'm sure there are meds out there that can.
yeah,
But like the difference between, I don't know, taking something that has like pain relieving quality, like an ibuprofen or something like that, versus something that is more geared to rewire or change the underlying structure of someone's body.
right.
Like those are two different things, and they're both called meds.
No,
But
good
like,
point.
and so one is like a temporary relief, which is amazing, but it's temporary. And the issue comes when that temporary becomes permanent.
Right,
And the other has a lot more to do with actually taking care of the underlying issue, in which case the goal is for it not to be permanent.
right.
Because once you actually fix the issue, the need for it might
Yeah,
disappear.
no, exactly.
Have there been any resources that you've encountered, any books that you've read, any channels, any speakers, anything that you've encountered over the years that either have really helped you or have been very helpful to other people?
Yes. So one, Dr. Drew Ramsey. So he's very, very active on Instagram. He's a published author. He'll do stuff that's live. He he is a magnificent human being. So anything that he does. Also, there's another extraordinary man. His name is Dr. Craig Bryan. So Dr. Bryan wrote a book called Rethinking Suicide, which is really extraordinary. Dr. Bryan is a professor at, I want to say Ohio State. Dr. Bryan, if I mess that up, I don't know if he would listen to this, but anyway, rethinking suicide is really, it was very controversial because it's looking at things in a different way, which is really cool. And then there's another book by Dr. Lynn Clark called SOS Help for Emotions, which I really like as well. So those are good. And I think, yeah, so I think Dr. Ramsey, and then Dr. Bryan, and then Dr. Clark, those three would be really, 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 really good.
And we'll definitely link those in the description. What about your own work? How do people get in contact with you? How do they find your stuff online? What do they
So
talk about?
if you Google David Woods Bartley, please feel free to email me. It's just me. That's I'm the company. So David at davidwoodsbartley.com. Also, feel free to call me 916-247-6389. My work is to go into organizations, schools, the military, and to share my journey, as I like to say, from mental wellness to mental wellness in this base talk, the why of suicide and the how of hope, and to give people, so at the end of the talk, you leave with a deeper understanding of the problem and fully equipped to create, to fully equipped from a prevention standpoint, that you can go out and create these extraordinary pockets wherever you go. Really, I guess the easiest way to say it, wherever you go, you can prevent someone from taking their life just simply by what you do. So it's the purpose of my life. It's what I love to do. And it's just, you will hear, my talks are a series. It's story after story after story after story, and a lot of quotes. So if you don't like quotes, I may not be your guy. I love quotes. There's so many brilliant people out there. We need to put your quote about hope and your beloved's quote about healing. So both of you, we've got to get those quotes.
We'll work on that. So I'd like to thank you, and like I said, we're gonna link all that. We're gonna put all that in the description for people to reference after this is done. This has been an amazing ride, and I wish we could keep going. We're already beyond the hour that
I know.
we generally kind of shoot for here, but it's been just an amazing ride of your own personal story, sharing of kind of from the depths to the heights in a way where you were in the depths and now you're shouting from the heights of what's possible for other people and giving them a perspective of hope. And some of the different things that you talked about on your way there, the different lessons that you learned, and the power of having a holistic framework of health, and being able to, like you said, put your wellness, put your self-care on a pedestal, which really is essential for helping people move from surviving to thriving. And it's that which unlocks the next level, when you're not just trying to stop dying, you're actually trying to move into thriving. It's that self-care piece that is so crucial for that. And then your perspective on how people can reach out to someone, or how they can be a part of making a difference in someone else's life, and those three things that you talked about, in the, like, remembering someone's name and connecting with them. And I forget about the first one, but I know that there was three. What, help me out here.
Well, that was the first one. The second one was the story about use curiosity to create understanding.
Okay.
Because what we see is almost never what is. So allow the person to tell the story. And then the third one was expression in the different ways.
Yes.
And in the card from my beloved brother like friend Greg, and then from Colonel Trouse, the incredible. There's a note from a young woman who's like a daughter to me. She was in a bad space. This was some years ago, and she wrote me this handwritten note, and the last 7 words say, "Depression can't have you because you're ours." Like, okay, that's like the greatest line of all time.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So.
Well, thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your experience, sharing your work, and sharing your advice for people who are either struggling with mental health issues or are wanting to reach out to people who are struggling with that. And thank you for bringing your perspective and bringing your wisdom, and bringing your heart to this.
And just please know how much, you were wonderful, and I feel an incredible connection with you. I feel like you're a brother, and this was a sacred experience, and I had such a good time. So thank you.